Okay, Jeff here. So we're on the working with the Germans one because I'm actually doing these three different books in parallel. So I have to keep in mind I'm doing the work with the understanding working the Americans and working with the Germans and working with the French all in parallel. So I'm actually applying the same principles, these same traits to each one of them. So I have to remind myself which one I'm working on so I can do the video. So working with the Germans, we're going to cover Melissa Lamson's first of the three cultural differences that you don't forget that you can't forget when that for working at work, right? So her three cultural differences for the Germans. Her first one is uh, there are there is a plus or minus thing with uh, hierarchy. So there are cultures that are high hierarchy, and there are cultures that are low hierarchy. So the Germans, yes, in general, tend to be high hierarchy. They're very well known for this. Everyone has a place in the structure. It's a very top down thing. And the bosses make the decisions and everybody follows, right? And you can see this. I mean, just go watch all the movies that come out. I mean, everything in movies going back for the past 80 years. Okay, so I mean, I just went and watched a movie last night called Freaks Out, right? Uh, and it's about the war stuff, and it's about this everybody following the orders. I mean, it's all high hierarchy, um, and and I've worked for a German company for 14 years now. Okay, and and the majority of all, and I've worked in a lot of different departments. Okay, uh, and it's consistently that way. Now there has been one exception where I've been working in a department that's trying to focus on the new work principles and all this stuff and new work. And there's an attempt to unlearn hierarchies. There's actually the whole attempt to do unlearning of hierarchies. But what I found is that what happens is that although an attempt to, there's really an approach to try to unlearn hierarchies, what happens is other committees are set up that create the same hierarchy structure in the end. So there's a trend and the tendency to go back to the hierarchy structure just in a different way. I'm not saying that's good or bad. Actually, it's kind of good in some ways because it helps provide a structure for people. A lot of people want to have a structure so they know what they can actually follow. Um, but then, of course, this brings into play there are other traits too that can combine with that in conflict with it, right? So there's nothing right or wrong about this. It's just there are some cultures that are more this way and some cultures that are not so much for this way, and then people within the cultures, right? So. Um, and then if you combine all the different traits we're going to get here, sometimes there can be conflict or sometimes be collaboration, right? It just comes down to that. So the high hierarchy thing is seen by all of the books and all the articles and all the training courses I've seen about the Germans. Just it's always there. High hierarchy is always there. Now, I have been doing my own independent kind of surveys with German colleagues to see what they think about their own culture. Not what other cultures think about them, but what do they actually think about their own culture where they've grown up. And yes, uh, the several that I've already surveyed say that this is true, although it's changing. Although it's changing with the younger generations now. And I've got some people my age that actually have grandkids. I've got, or adult children and now grandchildren, but, little grandchildren. And, and I've interviewed younger generation that are 20 years younger than me. And they all say that younger generations are trying to break away from this, but it's still there. It's still there. It's still very present in the culture, the high hierarchy. It's just still extremely present. And it's a battle. It's it's canoeing upstream to fight against the current coming down. That is high hierarchy, right? Um, so, and hierarchy, where's the hierarchy decides going downwards, right? Not the grassroots things where things kind of move upwards, right? Or flat, whatever you want to call this thing. And the people themselves. I've seen a lot of employees that actually want the hierarchy. because they actually know what to expect, right? They know who is responsible to make decisions, who you have to go to get the decision made. And especially they don't want to make the decisions, or they've been kind of told you can't make decisions. So they're kind of used to this, right? So it's always got to go up, and we got to escalate things. You go up that cycle, right? Boom. And you go up and then it goes back down the other side, right? You got to escalate problems. People don't deal with things like directly. They go up and it comes back down again. It's called escalation culture. So, and this can be good or bad, depending what company you, which project you're working on or whatever. It can be good or bad. It can it can it can work really well, or it could actually backfire really badly. I've seen both. So so this is high hierarchy, um, and and I actually like it in some places. I actually like the hierarchy thing because it just makes it really clear. You don't have to worry about, and then you know how to play the politics in the hierarchy, right? The problem with the low hierarchy is really hard to kind of figure out the politics of how do you deal with decision making, right? Well, we'll get into that, but in the high hierarchy, the decision making is always pretty clear who makes the decisions, right? Now, you can have you can influence without authority within the high hierarchy things, and this is the thing where people have influence over the leaders to make the decisions, right? Um, in the past, that's the whole thing of in the past, there's always been something, that behind. There's always a statement. Okay, I'm not trying to be the whole equality thing, but they said behind. There's always been this statement: behind every man, successful man, there's always an influential woman, right? So that there's always an influencer over decision makers. Okay, and I'm not trying to make that only that. There's always someone behind the person actually helping influence. So there's always an influencer, but that's the kind of statement you kind of see. Um, but there are lots of courses on influencing and without authority, and it's very true. You have to learn how to do this, and there are people do it more naturally, and some people have to learn how to do it. But there are courses on how to do this too. I've taken those too, and they all make sense. So, but here, the German culture does have a history of high hierarchy, and especially with World War II, and especially with Adolf Hitler. I mean, and you can see this in all the movies. Okay, it's so present. Um, so and there's an attempt to try to break free from that. There have been attempts. I still think there are attempts because like I said, people will reestablish the hierarchy in a different way, though it doesn't say hierarchy, but it actually creates committees that actually are another hierarchies because you got this committee making decisions that people should actually be, individual people could be making the decision. I get a whole committee having to do it. So it becomes a consensus based decision making, whereas one person could actually make the decision. It would be so much simpler. But then it becomes more complicated, and then then it ends up with having meetings about who first. The first half an hour is going to be about who has the power to make the decision, and then you start discussing the decision, and so it creates more time wasted. So and that's not bad either. I'm not saying that's bad. Sometimes it's actually good because then you get to really debate the content, right? But the decision making process is set in a hierarchy situation. And what happens when you throw it into a low hierarchy kind of mode and go into consensus based decision making, then it kind of upsets the high hierarchy approach, and then you got to find a way to get around that. And the Germans, what they do, they will tend to come back to a hierarchy approach model. Someone above makes decisions below, with influencers, of course. But it's not just everybody gets to make the decision, right? Or whoever shouts the loudest, right? So it kind of this kind of thing. So that's that's the thing on high hierarchy, which we'll see again. That comes out in another the other kind of section that I'll cover in the other book, the main book. I'll bring it up another one, but this one cuts us. I won't have to talk so much about the other one because it'll be obvious. But the hierarchy one is kind of pretty clear here. Okay, so that's that one.